Good evening or good afternoon, everyone, from wherever you may be joining us. Welcome to Order of the Seder 2024 Teshpad. And today we're going to be talking about Shulchan Orech, what may seem one of the less exciting parts of the Seder. Indeed, there's less meat at this part. Of course, this is where we have the most physical meat, but less interesting ideas. There's no text. There's less ritual. There's much less halachot about this specific part and stage of the Seder. It's just a nice meal. And it might seem like a break from the rigorous programming of the Seder. We've made it through all of these steps until now, and this long Magid where we've told the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, and now we get to relax a bit when we fulfill the mitzvot of matzah and maror, of course, and now we get to relax and just eat what we want, no specific guidelines, and take maybe a bit of a break, maybe a mental break from the Seder night. But what I want to talk about today is how this meal is really a part of our Seder and really a part of the program of this night. And it shouldn't be just a disconnected Yontiv meal like any other Yontiv meal. Of course, there is that element of the meal, that it's a Yontiv meal with meat that has simcha in it, and yet it is still a part of this Seder. We shouldn't be too distracted while we partake in our festive meal. So are there any halachot regarding this Shulchan Orech, regarding this part of our Seder? Very few. There are two interesting minhagim that I want to start off with. The first, you may be familiar with the minhag not to eat roasted meat on this night. So in my family, we always made boiled chicken paprikash, a Hungarian dish, because roasted chicken wouldn't be proper for this night. And why is that? Because historically, on Seder night, we used to eat the Korban Pesach, the Pesach sacrifice that was roasted specifically. That was how the Korban was meant to be eaten. It was roasted on fire. And we want to emphasize at our Seder meal that something is lacking, that we are not eating the Korban Pesach, unfortunately, that we have a whole Seder meal, we have this whole festive table that may be filled and bursting with delicacies of meats and side dishes and salads and whatever you might imagine, but there's something lacking. There's something that should be on the table, and that is the Korban Pesach. We don't want anyone to get confused and to think, oh, this roasted meat, this looks like maybe it's the Korban Pesach. We want to make it very clear that there's no Korban Pesach at the table and that is lacking. And that's why there's a minhag to not have roasted meat or chicken, but only boiled or cooked. Another minhag that there is for Shulchan Orech, for what we eat at this meal, some people may be familiar with the minhag to eat eggs, to eat hard-boiled eggs or eggs in salt water, some variations. And why do we eat eggs at this meal? It's definitely not anyone's highlight in terms of the food that we're looking forward to.
George Abbott is him, and I'm just joining him. Okay.
If I'm gonna mute, okay. So why do we have this minhag to eat eggs? So let's take a look at the first source here, the Shulchan Orech, and source number 1. And the Rama tells us, "Nuhagim biktat mekomot le'echol b'seuda beitzim." In some places, there's a minhag to eat eggs, zecher la'avelut, as a reminder, as a tribute towards our mourning. Mourning. What type of mourning? Mourning for the Mikdash, for what is lacking. ונראה לי הטעם משום שליל תשעה באב נקבע בליל פסח. And the Rama says, I think the reason that we bring up our mourning for the Mikdash on Seder night is because there's a connection between Tisha B'Av and Seder. The connection is that the night of the week that Seder falls out on is always going to be the same day of the week that Tisha B'Av is going to fall out on. So for instance, this year we're going to have the Seder Monday night or Tuesday, the day of Tuesday. And so Tisha B'Av is also going to be on Monday night. And the Rama says, because of this connection, because they're always going to be on the same day of the week. We have this association on Tisha B'Av on our Seder, and so we put out eggs because eggs are a food of mourning, and we put them out to kind of tap into that mourning a little bit. The Mishnah Berurah explains that no, the eggs have a different reason. He brings an explanation of the Gra. The Gra writes that the egg that we eat at the Seder is a reminder of the Korban Chagiga. So on Seder night, on Pesach, the first day of Pesach, 2 korbanot were brought. We have the Korban Pesach, which is the special Paschal sacrifice, the sacrifice of Pesach, which was brought in the afternoon. And we have the Korban Chagiga, which is a korban that is brought on any of the 3 regalim, of any of the 3 big holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. This was a korban that was brought. Chagiga literally means celebration, or chag, from the word holiday. This was a korban brought as part of the celebration. And so the Gra tells us that the egg that we eat is to remind us of the korban chagiga that we no longer have. Now, this idea of the egg reminding us of the korban, of the destruction of the Mikdash, is a bit strange. Although the Rama explains there's this connection, the day of Pesach is the day of Tisha B'Av, it still seems strange. This is our day of Geula. This is our night where we celebrate redemption from Egypt. Why on earth would we be bringing up the Mikdash? Well, it may be because of what we spoke about with the meat. The meat that's missing on our table is the meat of the Korban Pesach. And so at our Seder, at our Shulchan Orech, we can't forget that something is lacking. And so maybe there's this hint, this little hint of mourning with the egg, reminds us of mourning, reminds us of our mourning for the Mikdash and what is lacking at our table. Now, when we think about that for a moment, our Seder that we commemorate nowadays is really vastly different from the Seder that was in the time of the Mikdash. So we're used to an intimate family gathering around a table, maybe with some family friends, or maybe we've extended our home to those who are in need and invited a few people in. And yet the Seder table is one that is considered to be this family moment. It's this family event where we gather around together as a family, as a unit. But if we consider what Pesach looked like 2,000 years ago when the temple was still standing, we have to erase and let go of the idea of the beautifully set dining room table, the host and hostesses sitting at their own seats in their homes, because the Seder happens possibly far away from your home. The Seder happens in Yerushalayim. Everyone goes to Yerushalayim, whether or not they live there. And everyone has to gather and find their own space, find their own corner. But a lot of times there wasn't enough room in the homes. And so people would be gathering in the courtyards. And we have to imagine this grand communal gathering where everyone's sort of celebrating together in their own groups. And yet there's a hubbub in the air, and there's something very communal about everything about this night. And a core part of what we do on Seder, what they would do on Seder in the times of the Mikdash, was the Pesach, the Korban of the Pesach, bringing the Korban Pesach and eating the Korban Pesach. In fact, the Korban Pesach would determine the groups that were seated at the table. So in advance, one had to create a group called a chabura and say, this is my group, and we're going to be a team for Seder night. We're going to bring the Korban Pesach together in the afternoon before nightfall. And then when night falls, we're going to sit down and tell the story together and eat our meal together. And so the whole night looked similar to ours in that we have the elements of kiddush and wine and the 4 cups and matzah and maror. And yet the highlight is the special meat, the special korban, and over that, and the korban is really the centerpiece around which we tell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. And what I want to do is I want to look at some of the unique aspects and halachot surrounding this korban to help us understand better what this night is all about and maybe what it is that we're lacking when we have our Seder table without the Korban Pesach. So just to start us off, again, we're going to go through some of the halachot of Korban Pesach to understand what the nature of this Korban and of this ceremony is. So we're going to start off with the Rambam, who brings the first mitzvah. When he talks about Korban Pesach, the first thing he says is mitzvat aseh lishchot haPesach be'arba'asar lechodesh Nisan. It is a positive commandment. It's a mitzvah to sacrifice Pesach, the Pesach sacrifice, on the 14th day of Nisan. So this is a mitzvah. Umisha bitel mitzvah zu bezadon. Whoever intentionally refrained from doing this mitzvah, they said, I know today's the day that we need to bring the korban. I know I'm obligated, but I really don't feel like doing it this year for whatever reason, or I'm against this mitzvah. Whoever abstains from doing this mitzvah, he has no valid excuse. He's just done it. He's refrained for no reason. He's not tameh. He's not far away. This person is liable for karet, the highest form of punishment, being cut off from Kadosh Baruch Hu, being cut off from God, being cut off from the Jewish people. That's the punishment for one who abstains from doing the Korban Pesach. Now, what's interesting about karet is that karet is usually only a punishment that's given for negative commandments, so for transgressing over something that's forbidden. And this is one of only two mitzvot that are positive commandments, and if one doesn't do them, they need karet. This is one of two mitzvot, as I said. So if you don't bring the Korban Pesach, you will be liable for karet. And if you do not perform a circumcision, perform brit milah, then too, you are chayav karet. You need to have karet. And is there any connection between these two mitzvot? So beyond this formal halachic, sort of dry and technical connection, I want to show how there's a lot more that links these two mitzvot together, the mitzvah of the Korban Pesach and the mitzvah of Brit Milah, and to explore how that helps us understand Korban Pesach a little bit better. So the first source that I brought here, linking the two, I guess the second source, is from Shemot Perek Yud Bet, and this is where we have the original command, where Hashem commands Moshe to tell the Jewish people to bring this Korban. So this is still in Mitzrayim, we're still in Egypt, and this is all before God's taking us out. And he tells Moshe about the Korban Pesach. And this is the first Pesach that's ever performed, the Pesach in Mitzrayim. Vayomer Hashem Moshe ve'Aaron, zot chukat Pesach, kol ben echar lo yochal bo. The first, this is the law of Pesach. This is the law of what Pesach, how Pesach will be performed for generations. No foreigner shall eat of the Pesach. V'chol eved ish miknat kasef umalta oto az yochal bo. If a man owns a slave, now generally, if you're eating a meal and you have a slave, so you're going to give your slave some of your food. But when it comes to a Korban Pesach, you can't just give it to your slave without thinking twice. You can only give it to your slave if you first circumcise him. You shall circumcise him, and then he shall eat of it. So the slave must be circumcised. Kol adat Yisrael yasu oto, v'chi yagur itcha, all of Israel shall do this mitzvah, shall eat the Korban Pesach. V'chi yagur itcha ger, if a foreigner lives with you, v'asa Pesach la'Hashem, himo lo kal zachar ve'az yikrav la'asoto, v'ak yezrach ha'aretz. If a foreigner lives with you, he can only eat of the Korban after he has gotten a Brit Milah, after he has been circumcised. V'chol arel lo yochal bo. None who are uncircumcised shall eat of the Korban. So these psukim make it very, very clear that a precondition for eating the Pesach is having a Brit Milah. Only one who's had a Brit Milah can eat the Korban Pesach. And this plays out on a national level in the book of Yehoshua. After the people of Israel have been through the desert for 40 years and they reach the gates of the land of Israel, when they first enter the land, most of them aren't circumcised. The Mefarshim explained that their circumcision wasn't done in the desert because they were journeying, and that was considered dangerous to circumcise on the way. And so I have a question here about a female foreigner could only eat if she had gone to the mikvah for conversion. A female foreigner would have to be, so just a foreigner would have to be, yes, like she would have to have chosen to be associated with the Jewish people. And that is typically done with mikvah. There were some sort of in-between statuses in biblical times of a foreigner who's not fully converted, who's not fully Jewish, but has associated themselves with the Jewish people. I'm not sure if they would undergo mikvah or not, but there was, but they had affiliated themselves with the Jewish people. So, sorry, back to Yeshua. When the people have gone through the desert for 40 years, they weren't circumcised, and the psukim that describe them entering into the land of Israel say that the first thing that they did was perform circumcision for everyone, brit milah for the whole nation, for everyone who needed, obviously. It was when they all finished being circumcised that they sat in their places until they were healed. So we perform this brit milah for the whole community. Vayomer Hashem LeYoshua, Hayom galoti et chirpat Mitzrayim alechem, vayikra Shem hamakom hahu Gilgal ad hayom hazeh. Hashem says to Yeshua, at this point, we have removed the disgrace of Mitzrayim. Something about Egypt has been removed from you. And now, the next pasuk, Vayechanu bnei Yisrael beGilgal, so they encamped at this place, Vayasu et haPesach ב14 yom lechodesh, ba'erev ba'arvot Yericho. And they did Pesach, and that day, and the 14th that year, they performed the Pesach, meaning they brought this korban. So we see from Shmot and from Yehoshua that we need Brit Milah in order to perform Pesach. We saw previously that these are the two mitzvot that are chayav karet, that one is liable for karet if they do not do them. And why would this be, though? Why would it be that this is a precondition for the Korban Pesach? What is it about Korban Pesach that needs Brit Milah before it? So if we go back to the first Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim, for that Pesach, the preparations began way before the day itself. So they weren't cleaning out their house for chametz in Mitzrayim, but from the 10th of Nisan, 4 days before the day of bringing the korban, they were commanded to bring to put aside a lamb. And if we look at these psukim here, we'll see that this was part of this is how the mitzvah is first introduced to Am Yisrael. ויקרא משה לכל זקני ישראל ויאמר עליהם משכו יקחו לכם צאן ומשפחתכם ושחטו הפסח. Draw out, take for yourself this sheep and slaughter it for Pesach. And the Mefarshim explained that it was set aside for these 4 days. It was set aside from the 10th, and they would wait until Yud Daled, and on the 14th they actually performed the slaughtering of the sacrifice. And what were they to do once they sacrificed? So you'll take a bunch of hyssop, a little branch of a tree, and dip it in the blood, and touch it on your doorway, the lintel and the doorposts. So the day of 14 comes in Mitzrayim. The Jews all take out their sheep, they slaughter their sheep, they dip the branches in the blood, they smear it on the doorways, and then they go inside, they close the door, and they stay inside. Moshe tells them, do not leave your home. Why? Hashem is going to pass through Mitzrayim on this night. This is to perform Makat Bechorot, the famous plague of the firstborn. God is going to kill all of the Egyptian firstborns. And when God passes by your home, your Jewish home, that you've smeared the blood on the doorpost, he'll see, oh, this is a Jewish home. This is a house where someone has performed Pesach, and therefore I'm not going to come in. And God will not allow the destroyer, this angel that is taking the lives of so many Egyptians, he won't allow him into your home. So something about this Korban creates this protection, creates this signal to God, hi, we're Jews here, don't come in. And something about it protects the Jews and creates this protection from the plague of the firstborn. Why is this? Why would what does this korban have to do? What does the sacrifice have to do with protection from the firstborn? Is this just random? Is it just a symbol, a little, it could have just as easily been everyone grab your scarves and hang them outside your door? Or is there something about Korban Pesach that really creates a reason for God to skip over the Jewish people, a reason for God to not take the lives of the Jews? So the Mechilta on asks about this special command to take the Korban Pesach in advance. Why are we commanded to choose our sheep? Is that just to make sure that we have the best sheep possible for the sacrifice? Is that just to make sure that we don't procrastinate and come to it last minute without being properly prepared? And the Chilta says, no, this is important. It's important that we take the sheep in advance. And it explains, why do we take it 4 days early? Why did they take it back then in Mitzrayim? Rav Matya ben Charash explains that the time had come for redemption. הגיע שבועתו שנשבע הקדוש ברוך הוא לאברהם שיגאל את בניו, ולא היה בידם מצוות שיעסקו בהם כדי שיגאלו. So there was this promise to Abraham. God had made a promise to Abraham that his children would make their way down to slavery and eventually would be redeemed. And the time had come for that redemption, and yet there was a problem. The people were not worthy of redemption. The people at this point in Mitzrayim were slaves. They were deep in their slavery. They were deep in this life that they were living. And Chazal tell us, and the Nevi'im tell us, that they were also steeped in idolatry. And because of that, they had no merit. There was no reason for God to take them out, except for this promise that he had to Abraham. And so what God did was he had to create some sort of mechanism to give them a reason for redemption. And the Midrash says he gave them 2 mitzvot. He gave them 2 mitzvot that have to do with blood. This is based off of a pasuk in Yechezkel that says that describes God choosing to take Israel out of Mitzrayim, and it says there that God says, I passed over you and saw you in blood, in your bloods. And the Midrash says, what's the bloods? What are these 2 bloods? Dam Pesach v'dam Milah, the blood of the Korban Pesach, this sacrifice where the blood features so prominently, the blood on the doorpost, and the blood is this central part, and the blood of the circumcision. So on this night, we were engaged in these 2 mitzvot of circumcising, or the circumcision was before, and in bringing the Korban Pesach, all of this so that us being engaged in mitzvot provides the impetus for God to take us out of Mitzrayim. But again, I still want to keep going back to this. Why this specific mitzvah? Is there anything intrinsic about the Korban Pesach that makes it the mitzvah that God chose to give us the merits that will be taken out of Mitzrayim? Could it have just been giving tzedakah that night? Could God have told us, give some tzedakah, and then you'll be engaged in a mitzvah that will give you the merit to leave Mitzrayim that will make you worthy of me taking you out? What is it about Korban Pesach that this specific mitzvah is chosen? And I think a fantastic answer is brought in the Tur. The Tur tells us how Korban Pesach is so unique, is such a special mitzvah that makes it the mitzvah that's chosen to be the first mitzvah given to Am Yisrael in Mitzrayim. Setamim says, why a sheep? Why do we take a sheep? What is it about this animal, about this situation? Tziva likach se. He commanded that we take a sheep. Bishvil shayu ovdim oto. Tziva leshochto le'enehem u'lashpil Eloheihem ve'kocham. The Torah says, in order to understand the significance of this mitzvah, we have to go back to Egypt, to biblical Egypt, and understand the culture there. In ancient Egypt, the sheep was one of the deities. The sheep was considered a god. And we have echoes of this in Tanakh when Paro tells Yosef that it's considered degrading and disgusting to the Mitzrim to be a shepherd. The Mitzrim didn't believe in shepherding and using sheep for human uses because they saw sheep as some sort of god, as some sort of force and power. And the Torah tells us it's no coincidence that on this night when we become God's people, we're commanded to take a sheep. But we specifically want to show the Mitzrim that we have no regard for their avodah zarah. We're spitting in the face of the Egyptians. The Jews, the slaves, are spitting in the faces of their taskmasters by humiliating their God. So this is what they regard as most precious, and the Jewish people are taking it on this night and stepping on it and humiliating it. Why? Because we're making a statement here. We know that there's no God except for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is the night where we proclaim our emunah, our faith in God, and we proclaim, more importantly, our loyalty to God. The way of doing this is by distancing ourselves from avodah zarah and distancing ourselves from the Egyptian concept of forces and powers and showing that we believe in God. And yet think of how terrifying this must be for the slave who's used to obeying his taskmaster, who's used to being subjected to whatever his master tells him. And suddenly the Jewish people are told to defy their Egyptian masters. They're told, take this sheep 4 days in advance and tie it up outside your house so everyone knows what you're about to do. And we can just imagine the Egyptians heckling the Jews and saying, what are you doing with that sheep over there? What are you planning on doing? Says, I'm sacrificing it for my God. No, you can't be doing that. The Egyptians might be threatening them, or the Egyptians might be scared of them at this point after all of the plagues. And yet for the Jews to go against their master's wills in such a stark way requires a lot of courage, a huge amount of trust in God that he's really going to deliver and stand by them. And so if we think about it, this isn't just any mitzvah of giving tzedakah, any mitzvah of whatever, of saying Kriyat Shema, but this is a deep mitzvah where the people are commanded to go against what's natural to them, to go against their affiliation with avodah zarah, to go against their subjugation to the Egyptians, and to really publicly, courageously demonstrate that they stand with God and they want to belong to the Jewish people. And I think that core of belonging to the Jewish people, going back to our first question of what links Brit Milah and Pesach, this is exactly it. Because when one is circumcised, that is a sign in their body that they belong to the Jewish people. And so this is a moment where a Jewish adult has to choose to belong to the Jewish people in a very difficult way. But both Pesach and Brit Milah demonstrate our belonging to the Jewish people and our belonging to Hashem, despite the challenges, despite the difficulties that might be. So that explains the Korban Pesach being connected to the Brit Milah as a moment where a Jew proclaims that he stands with the Jewish people in Mitzrayim. Way back when, the first time Pesach was performed, the night that we celebrate for all these years going forward. But what about the Pesach that happens after that? What about the Pesach in later years, the Pesachs after Yeshua's time, coming into the land? Does this Pesach still have the same idea, the Korban Pesach, still have this idea of being affiliated with the Jewish people? Well, I'll remind you that those psukim that we saw still connect the Brit Milah and Pesach, meaning no foreigners can partake of this mitzvah. It's very, very specific to the Jewish people. Only Jews can eat of the Korban. And the Sefer HaChinuch explains why it's so emphasized that this is a mitzvah that Jews can eat, only Jews can eat from. And I'm skipping to the reasons that he brings for the mitzvah. This is the mitzvah that only Jews can eat the korban. בעבור שקורבן זה לזכר חירותנו ובואנו בברית נאמנה עם השם יתברך. This mitzvah is all about remembering our freedom and our coming into a covenant with God. ראוי שלא יהנו בו רק אותם שהשלימו באמונה, והם ישראלים גמורים, ולא אלו שעדיין לא באו עמנו בברית שלם. It's only fitting that those who are part of this covenant can eat the korban, because the korban is all about demonstrating that we belong to God, that we're God's people. And the Sefer HaChinuch, makes it very clear that this is the core, this is the basis for this mitzvah for all generations. When we eat Korban Pesach, it's all about our special relationship with God, and that's why only Jewish people can eat of the Korban. And he says that's also why those who are uncircumcised are not worthy of eating the Korban. And if we go back to, again, that image of the whole nation gathering in Yerushalayim, consider the fact that everyone comes on this one night to meet and greet at the Mikdash in Yerushalayim. So the whole nation is gathered there. You know you're going to see your uncles and cousins, your extended family, and that long-lost friend who lives on the other side of the country and you never get to see. Everyone gathers at this moment. And so the force of the mitzvah creates a community. It creates the Jewish people alive in front of your eyes. And everyone who goes up to Yerushalayim experiences that in the most real of ways. They see the whole nation. They see the politicians and the leaders alongside the laborers and the simple farmers. Everyone comes together at this night. And it's this very public demonstration of our being one united nation and being God's united nation. There's also a very interesting halacha that one who's impure cannot bring the Korban Pesach. And they have an opportunity to make up Pesach the next month on the 14th of Iyar. There's like a makeup date for one who missed it. And yet, if the whole nation is impure for whatever reason, so one reason might be, in our days, the whole nation is impure. On a communal level, we're not pure. So then an exception is made to the rule, and the Korban Pesach can actually be brought in communal impurity. If everyone is not pure, then we say, okay, we'll bend the rule. The whole community is impure, we can bring it in this situation, which is just another reflection of this very communal nature of this mitzvah. The mitzvah is all about Am Yisrael. And if Am Yisrael is all impure, then Am Yisrael will bring it impure. That's fine, as long as Am Yisrael is bringing the Korban Pesach. Another element that reflects this communal part of the sacrifice is the chabura that we discussed earlier briefly. So as I mentioned, you need to create a group, a predetermined group that you say, we are going to eat our korban together. We're a team for this night. And the korban, it was a large amount of meat, a whole sheep. I mean, a few parts were taken out for the mizbech, but it was a large amount of meat, and it was much more than one family could consume. So maybe you invite an extended family, cousins and uncles and aunts, But it might not even be enough for that. So you need to team up with another family. And you can't just have this korban on your own. You can't just say, I'm going to have my little family, but you almost have to look outside of your own little family unit, and you have to team up with someone. You have to gather as a community. And this is another way where the togetherness of this mitzvah is emphasized. The Korban Pesach is not about the individual, it's about our belonging to a community of God-fearing individuals. If it was way back then in Mitzrayim where we chose to affiliate ourselves with God, and if it's throughout the generations as we gather in groups and gather all together in Yerushalayim. Now, I want to continue looking at the halachot of the Korban Pesach, or special mitzvot that have to do with this Korban, in order to understand more what this Korban is about. So as I mentioned, the first theme that we talked about is the connection between the Korban and Brit Milah, and how that shows us this is a Korban that's all about community. But there are some other very important themes in the Korban Pesach. And the second thing I want to discuss is the Korban Pesach and freedom. There are two very interesting mitzvot that we have that have to do with the Korban Pesach, that determine exactly how we eat the Korban. The first is, you can see the Sefer HaChinuch counts the 8th mitzvah as Shelo lehotir mibasar Pesach. There's a special mitzvah to not leave over from the Korban Pesach. So in the times of the Mikdash, this is before refrigerators are invented, obviously, there's a limit to how long you can eat the meat of your korban. Any korban, most korbanot have 3 days or 2 days, and it makes sense given that there's no refrigerator. You don't want the meat to turn rancid. It's disrespectful to the meat of a korban if you're going to let it spoil. And so the Torah tells you have to eat it within 2 or 3 days, otherwise it's no good. But here with the Korban Pesach, there's a much shorter time limit. Actually, we have to eat it that night. By daybreak, we have to throw out the meat of the korban. So again, just to run you through the timeline, we bring the sacrifice in the afternoon of the 14th, which is when we're usually taking our pre-Seder naps nowadays, hopefully. And then you eat it in that night, anytime in that night until dawn of that night. And why do we have this very short time frame to eat the Korban Pesach? Another mitzvah that we have that has to do with this Korban is Shelo lishbor etzem min haPesach. There's a special mitzvah not to break any of the bones of the Korban Pesach. Now this one really seems strange. We've got this whole celebration. We've got this whole Seder night, and we know that Seder night has a lot of details and a lot of rigorous ritual, and yet we go down to this level of detail that you cannot break the bone of your Korban Pesach. It's a very strange mitzvah, and it's not just a side note in the Shulchan Orech talking about Korban Pesach. This is one of the 613 mitzvot is the mitzvah not to break a bone from the Korban Pesach. Why? And the Sefer HaChinuch explains that these two mitzvot, not leaving over from the Korban Pesach and not breaking a bone, have the same root. And what is that root? I'm going back to the mitzvah not to leave over from the Korban. משורשי מצווה זו מה שכתוב בשחיטתו לזכר ניסי מצרים. וזה שנצטווינו שלא להותיר ממנו. This mitzvah of not leaving over from the meat is a reminder of the miracles that happened in Mitzrayim. העניין הוא כדרך מלכים ושרים. This is the way of kings and noblemen, שאינם צריכים להותיר מתבשילים מיום ליום. A king at his table. He has a table laden with goods, full of meats, and he doesn't save any of it for the next day, because the next day there'll be more. A king is not worried about saving, putting aside for the next day and portioning out his meals. But he has plenty, he has abundance. And so his table, whatever's left over gets thrown out, or maybe given away to the local soup kitchen. ועל כן אמר שאם יוותר ממנו שישרף כדבר שאין חפץ בו, כדרך מלכי האדמה. So the Sefer HaChinuch tells us if we have leftovers of the Korban Pesach, we should burn it as if we don't have a care in the world. Tomorrow there'll be more meat. There's no reason to leave it over. וכל זה לזכור ולקבוע בלב שאותו זמן גאלנו השם יתברך, ונעשינו בני חורין וזכינו למלכות ולגדולה. All this is to remember and to establish in our hearts. It should be deep in our hearts that at this time of Yetziat Mitzrayim, Hashem has made us free men and made us as Bnei Chorin, and we've come to a place of majesty, of greatness. Now, this is a theme that we're familiar with on Seder night. We act as free men. We do so many things to show that we're free, to show that this transition that has occurred on this night from slavery to freedom takes us through to this day. We drink 4 cups of wine. Wine is a symbol of majesty. And we don't pour our own cups. Someone else pours for us. That shows, I don't pour my own cup. I'm royalty. Someone should pour my cup. And we lean, another sign of this expression of our freedom. And Sefer HaChinuch says, another thing that we do is that we don't leave over the meat. And the same for the breaking the bone, the prohibition to break the bones. He says, אין כבוד לבני מלכים ויועצי ארץ לגרור העצמות ולשוברם ככלבים. לא יאות לעשות ככה, כי אם לעניי העם הרעבים. Who breaks bones? The poor people break bones because they want to suck out the marrow. There's more meat there. There's more meat inside of the bones. And if we want to really fully take advantage of our korban, of our meat, let's break it open, let's suck out that marrow. And the Sefer HaChinuch says, no. We are wealthy on this night. We are majesty. We're not concerned about our next meal. We're not concerned about maximizing. We're happy to throw away and waste because we're free men and we know that tomorrow there'll be more. And this is another way that we show our freedom, that we show how free, how wealthy and comfortable we are in our lives. And of course, this is what brings us to the Hallel that we say on Seder night. Our freedom, our feeling so free, brings us to, this is the climax of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, of telling the story. We don't just tell the story, but we have to relive it. We have to experience our freedom and really tap into the fact that we are free men. And the last aspect of the Korban Pesach that I want to discuss is the connection between the Korban Pesach and Hallel. So the Rambam tells us that, as we know, on Seder night, a big part of our night is the Hallel that we say. We say Hallel in Shul of Ma'ariv, and we also say Hallel at the Seder table. And the Rambam tells us that this Hallel that we say has to do with the Korban. כבר ביארנו בהלכות חמץ ומצה שהוא טעון הלל בשעת אכילתו. The Korban Pesach requires Hallel to be recited at the time of its eating. And the Mishnah describes that Hallel was sung by the Kohanim, by the Levi'im, when the Korban itself was brought. So the Levi'im would stand there in the afternoon, and when the Korban was being brought, they would sing Hallel. And then everyone would bring the meat home to their families, to their chabura. And they would do the Seder night, they would perform the Seder night. And right after they would eat the meat, they would say Hallel. So we obviously continue to say Hallel on Seder night, but the Rambam here makes it seem like the reason we say Hallel is because of the Korban. It's not just the Hallel of a Chag. We usually say Hallel of a Chag in the morning. But the Hallel here has to do with the Korban Pesach. It's deeply connected to this sacrifice. And why would that be? What's the connection between the Hallel and the Korban Pesach? Just going to Going to exit the sharing. Quickly, sorry. Okay. So why Hallel why is Hallel connected to the Korban Pesach? Why do we specifically say Hallel because of the Korban when we eat the Korban or right after with the meal? So Rav Menachem Leibtag points out that the Korban Pesach is a pretty unique Korban when we compare it to other sacrifices. There are a few halachot about this Korban that really make it stand out, which we've already touched on most of them. And the halachot that he lists specifically is the halacha not to leave over from the Korban over to the next day, as we mentioned. The halacha to eat it in a group. And he also mentions the halacha of eating the Korban with matzah and maror. So this is not a Korban that we just eat on its own, but it has to be eaten in a very specific way. The mitzvah of matzah and the mitzvah of maror on Seder night are also connected to the Korban Pesach. And Rav Menachem Leibtag asks, why these elements of Korban Pesach? Why these unique elements? He says, when we look at these halachot, they're very similar. These laws are very similar to the laws of a different Korban. They're very similar to the laws of the Korban Todah, a Korban of thanks, a sacrifice that's brought when one has to thank God for something that has happened to him. So some of us might be familiar with Birkat HaGomel, the bracha that one says when they've been redeemed from something, when they feel that God has saved them from a sickness, from danger of a sort, from being released from jail, from travel. So if one has experienced a situation where they've been saved, they need to give thanks to God. And we say a bracha, Birkat HaGomel, but in the times of the Mikdash, one would bring a sacrifice for this. They would bring a Korban Todah. And the halachot of the Korban Todah were very similar to the Korban Pesach. So the Korban Todah was only eaten for one day. You had one day to eat it. And it was brought with bread, with a mincha. But Chazal tell us that it was brought with a huge amount of bread. So if I want to bring a Korban Todah, I bring a sheep, but I also have to bring 40 different pieces of bread, 40 different loaves of bread. 10 of them were proper loaves of bread, were risen leavened dough, and 30 of them were matzah. So the Korban Todah is brought with bread and matzah. And you have this very short time frame to eat it in. So picture this for a moment. You have been very sick. You had a high fever, which is dangerous at the time, in biblical times, of course, and you come back to health, and you wanted to give thanks to God, and so you bring this Korban Todah, and you come to the Mikdash with your sheep and with this huge amount of bread. And you sacrifice it, you're very grateful to God, and now you have one day to eat all of this. What are you going to do? This is way too much food for one person. And so a person bringing a Korban Todah is obligated, not in the formal halachic sense, but more the situation requires him to gather some people and say, hi, would you want to take some of my Korban Todah? Would you want to partake of this meal? I'm having a festive meal right now because I'm giving thanks to God for being saved from being sick. And the situation requires that a huge meal and feast gathers around this Korban. Everyone gathers together. And this man who's come to just thank God for his private rescue finds himself telling the story. Yes, I was really sick. They discovered stage 4 cancer, and the doctors were working for months. And thank God I've been in remission now for a few years, and there's no trace of it. It seems to have disappeared. The doctors are calling it a complete miracle. And he's telling this story to this huge table because he's gathered the whole neighborhood, whoever he encountered. He's invited everyone to his feast because how else is he going to finish the meal? How else is he going to finish all this meat and bread? And so it creates the situation where one who has been saved by God is almost forced to say Hallel, as it were, not in the formal sense, but to tell the story of his being saved to a large group of people. And Rav Menachem Leibtag points out that on Seder night, when we bring our Korban Pesach, that's exactly what we're doing. We don't have the the personal story of I was sick and I was saved, but it's the national story of we were slaves in Egypt and we were taken out. And we gather in a group, we gather in communities, and we have this large amount of meat that we have to finish in that night, and we have to do it quickly. So we have to gather together. We have to do it in a public forum. And the meal leads to the Hallel. The meal, the Korban, reminds us exactly of what happened in Mitzrayim and why God took us out. And it transforms this feast into the climax of Seder night, the focus that we have, which is telling the story in order to relive it and to thank Hashem for making us his people, for bringing us to a place of then Yerushalayim, the Mikdash, Eretz Yisrael, and being God's people. So the structure of the Korban itself creates this format of gathering together in praise and thanksgiving. Now, I want to emphasize all of this because I think it is so important that we realize that when we eat our Shulchan Orech, it is not just a break from the Seder night. It's not an interruption. It's not a commercial break. It's not a chance to relax and sit back and just, whew, okay, now we can let go of all the rigorous commands. Yes, there's less formal halachic structure to that part of the Seder. And yet, our meal should be one where we're focused on continuing what we've done till now. We've built ourselves up through Magid to experiencing Yetziat Mitzrayim. And this meal should be one where we're emphasizing our thanksgiving, our Hallel, our thanks to God, our gratitude for where we are in life, for being the Jewish people, for being God's special chosen people. And of course, with an eye towards what we're still hoping for. And unfortunately, this past year, the lack in our world is so much more prominent, and our dreams for the future, our dreams for the next steps of Geulah, of getting closer to God, of becoming closer to this dream of a peaceful world where Am Yisrael is gathered in Eretz Yisrael, are so much closer to us. And our Shulchan Orech should be a meal that brings us to the next step of the Seder. It should bring us to the Hallel naturally. We should come to Hallel not as okay, we're done now and we're moving on to the next piece, but rather our meal should be filled with content that's around the Seder night. It should be filled with content of thanksgiving. It should be filled with context of community, of gathering before Hashem, of royalty, of expressing our freedom, and it should bring us to the beautiful Hallel of Seder night, which is the climax of everything that we're doing. So Be'ezrat Hashem, may this Pesach be one that brings us closer to the ultimate Geulah, and may we be zoche to gather in Yerushalayim someday soon to celebrate Pesach together as one community, giving Hallel to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Thank you very much.
Amen. Amen. Thank you very